That. So
Yeah.
and Huyan is the master of ceremony. Huyan, are you there? Huyan.
She actually here.
Yeah, I'm sorry because I am muted. So thank you very much, for joining our webinar today. So as you know that, under our project to support for the movable finance development in Cambodia, including the supply chain finance. So we are now today is going to organize a webinar focusing on the warehouse finance. So joining our webinar today, so I would like to introduce Mr. Heng Koi, the General Manager of the IPC. And from the IFC, we have Mr. Ding Chang Lai, the Principal Operations Officer, who is the Financial Infrastructure Practice Group Lead, covering Asia and Pacific country. And myself, my name is Huyền Pham from IFC. I'm in the same team with Ding Chang. And from the IFC, we also have the Vatana, Mr. Vatana Park, who is our, the consultant working on the project as well. And the main speaker today, I would like to introduce Mr. Srinath Kesavan, who is the CEO of the Chatrix consulting firm. We also would like to welcome all of you from the financial institutions joining us today. To start our webinar today, so may I invite Mr. Heng Koi, the General Manager of the IPC, to do the opening remark. So the floor is yours, Mr. Heng Koi.
Thank you, Huyen, and very good afternoon to our co-host, IFC, Mr. Chin Chan Lai, and the team. Our speaker, Mr. Srinath. I'm sorry if we very pleasure and honor to have you join and presentation and also discussion for this very important topics. And also we are the co-hosts of this webinar. We very grateful and honored to welcome, particularly I think the presence of some official who representative from I think various ministry. I think include from the central bank, from Ministry of Commerce, and also from non-bank authority. And also warmly welcome to all our college from the bank and finance institution, and also greatly warm welcome to our stakeholder and partner, development partner. So I think it grateful to have huge, I think that more than around 100 participants had been registered. So I think it showed that our providers, authority, related authority, government authority, and also partner express more interest to explore, exchange, and learning on this topic. And I think that take this opportunity, I would like to update a few items from the Association of Banks in Cambodia regarding to this topic. I think that in line with the National Strategic Plan on Financial Inclusion, the Association of Banks in Cambodia had been touched on the supply chain finance, movable finance in the last few years. And I think that this year, particularly the 2025, the council of ABC had decided that they more like serious on this topic. And why we the association put more serious on this topic, I think because kind of like movable finance, supply chain finance become like more the right time, right time. I think frankly, access to finance through the collateral a bit like high already at a high level already. So I think this kind of movable finance, supply chain finance will be one of the important tool in order to improve access to finance, particularly from the SME, which really contribute to the priority of the central bank and the government in regarding to support to the SME to better access to finance. And the second point is the ABC and the IFC had been committed that this year we aim to introduce this kind of webinar. I think now we call first webinar, and there will be more webinar to come. I think that as also committed principle by us, I think by our co-host IFC and us, we plan that it will be one webinar per month from this month until end of the year. So I think that this will be we believe that this kind of webinar will contribute in regarding to improve more understanding, share tool, and also discuss the challenge that we face in our market. And gratefully that I think that the IFC also put more effort in order to help support our sector to bring the international speaker to contribute to this webinar. So I think that I will not say too much. Again, welcome and thank you our participant and also our partner for your time, and we would like also want you to more like interact. I think that during the presentation or after presentation, I think that we still wish everyone can be more interact through like you raise your hand or either through the chat box. So we welcome more engagement. And also I think we also share the material. I think our material will be shared after particularly the slide presentation. I hope our speaker will be okay for us to share the material after the session.
Sure.
So yeah, thank you very much. So wish our discussion fruitful. So would like back the floor to our master, Pastor Ramani. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Heng Khoi. You know, from the IFC, I would like to thank Mr. Heng Khoi specifically, and thank the IBC for collaboration with us in the recent years. So as you know that our Movable Finance Development Project is focusing more on supporting the Cambodia to issue some more guidance on the movable finance and providing the capacity building on the movable finance to the financial institutions, and also providing a support to set up the third-party supporting service providers in Cambodia. So as you know that our project working for a few years, and right now we reached some milestone already. For example, the IBC have issued the factoring handbook, which can consider as a guideline to all the financial institutions to deploy the factoring products or solutions in Cambodia. And also, we have the Bangji, who is the first SCF e-platform operating in the market already. And from Cambodia, we can say that the Cambodia has a very good law on the secure transaction, and we can see that the law in Cambodia is much better than the other countries, even much better than Vietnam. But we can see that the movable finance market in Cambodia is not really fully developed. So, we can see the huge opportunity for the Cambodia to develop further in the movable finance. So that's why from the IFC we are very willing and very happy to work further with the Cambodia Bank Association to develop further the movable finance market. And that the warehouse finance is one of the main products under the movable finance. So that's why today we really happy to join with the IBC to organize the webinar. And as Mr. Heng Koi mentioned, that we will have the series of webinar focusing on the movable finance, and this webinar will be the first one. And in 2025 we are going to organize more webinars, and we would like to thank you all. Thank you IBC, thank you Mr. Heng Koi, thank you all participants for joining us, and we do hope that we continue to receive your support in the near future. And we would like also to thank Mr. Srinath Keshavan, who joined us today, and we believe that with the insight information shared by Mr. Srinath will bring the benefit to all the participants visiting the warehouse finance. And I do not want to take more minutes from all of you. And final word is, I would like to thank you all, and I wish you a great health and great success in our webinar today. So now to continue to our webinar, I'm not sure if IBC, Mr. Sokchan, so do you want to take a picture of all the people, or we can do it later on?
I think yes, we can do a picture
Yes.
together.
Yes. Okay. So for the picture for admin thing, could you please all turn on your camera, and Mr. Sokchan will help us to take picture of us, and then when finished, Sokchan, please let me know, and then we can continue with our webinar. Thank you.
Okay, ask Mr. Srinath to stop sharing a bit so that we can see all the background. Thank you.
Okay.
One more minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sokchan. So now we will go to the content of the webinar. To start the webinar, so we will have the Dinh Trang Lai with our principal operations officer taking care of financial infrastructure practice group. Will present about the Cambodia market context, and then later on we can go with the Srinath Keshavan. So now, Mr. Dinh Trang Lai, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Huya, and thank you all for joining. So I will actually take a little bit time in the beginning to lecture on something. So altogether, we had 2.5 years, including the opening time. So the number of points to make, and before you jump into Srinath's contents. I've been in and out of Cambodia for some years, and I think most of you has seen me before, either on site or online. So we know that in normal market, inventory finance is very common. and often done together with receivables finance for good reasons. In the previous trainings, we also say that there are 6 ways to do inventory finance. And inventory, sometimes people say stock, but legally it is called inventory. So there are 6 ways. So 2 of the 6 ways will be called warehouse finance, and excluding, in your case, warehouse receipt finance. So basically in Cambodia, you do not really need to use any word like warehouse receipt finance, which will need actually governance systems behind. But you are not going to have such a governance system in the next several decades. There is no hope. So let's just stay with ordinary warehouse finance, which has 2 ways to do it. One is called SMA, and the other is called CMA, which Srinath will explain. And Srinath is a veteran in this industry. He's based in Singapore. So this is the first point. And on the so-called warehouse finance, we will have 2 webinars. So today is the first part, and next month we are going to deliver the second part. Now, the so-called warehouse finance actually means that you are lending against the inventory that is in one or more warehouses. And those warehouses are either monitor or control. The key word is monitor. Another keyword is control. So these are 2 different contrasts. Now, and I know you will wonder where the business opportunities are. Many of you say that, oh, we look around, we did not find anything. It is not actually not true. So many of you will also say that, oh, rice, agriculture, rice sector. Yeah, it is true, but rice sector is only one sector. You only have so many people that you can deal with, so many business operator that you can deal with. And look outside the agricultural sector also. And if you open out your mind, if you understand what is really behind, the opportunities are actually everywhere. So I will give some examples of opportunities. First easy example is you have e-commerce. And e-commerce may not have been very mature in Cambodia, but eventually it will come. In the e-commerce world, is normally like this. The e-commerce operator will create or lease warehouses in strategic locations. So because they want the goods to be delivered to the consumer as soon as possible, normally within the same day or at least the next day. So they are not going to take the goods from your home and then deliver to, let's say, the Mr. Han Kuai. They are not going to do that. So the vendors will typically have to put the goods that you want to sell in some warehouses that is controlled and managed by the warehouse, by the e-commerce operator. Most of the time is like that. There are also smaller e-commerce platforms that they have point-to-point delivery. That can be, but we are talking about the mainstream one. The mainstream one will be like the JD, like Amazon, this kind of thing of players. So for the vendors to get financing is actually super easy. So you either do it based on receivable or you do it based on inventory. But sometimes in some country, the payment is immediate. Then you don't have inventory. Then you don't have receivable. In some country, they will only pay the vendor 7 days later or 14 days later, then you have receivable. Now, how is this normally done? Is once the good is deposited in the warehouse, remember is controlled by or managed by the operator, by the e-commerce operator, then immediately you will get your money. And your inventory collateral is actually controlled by the e-commerce operator. So you need to have a partnership. You need to sign an agreement with the e-commerce operator. So this is like a new way of doing warehouse finance in the past decade. And all your questions about the enforcement, control, and things like that, they are gone. There's no such matter because it's automatically controlled. And you will also have things like valuation and things like that. Always remember, in the space of movable asset finance, everything is about cash conversion. How your inventory will be converted into receivable and then into cash, or directly into cash in some cases. So it's not about valuation. Valuation will sometimes come into the picture at some point because you need to understand how much you can lend. So that's only a mechanical thing, but it's not the key thing. So never say that, oh, I don't know how to evaluate the inventory and therefore I cannot do any business. Do not say that. Do not think that way. What you need to think is how the inventory will be converted into cash and how you can monitor and control the cash. That's what you need to think about it. So this is one example. Another example is that you will have dealers, not small dealer, larger dealer like wholesaler or importer of numerous goods. I'm old enough, I mean as old as Srinath now, so I have seen many things in my life. So there are warehouses where they will have frozen mix. The frozen mix are imported from South America or from Africa or from, if it's chicken wings, often from America or whoever. And you will need it because you have a large tourism industry. Those importer and dealer, they will definitely need financing. But I know you do not give financing, and therefore they will get it from other countries. But this is your own business that you lost to other country. Is actually easy thing to do. They will be importers of Korea cosmetic. Yes, I have physically visited a warehouse with Korea cosmetic. Of course, I also visited frozen the meat in warehouses. All of them, 100% of them, means the owner, they have financing. If they don't have financing, they cannot do this business for simple, easy reasons. I also see frozen the seafood. The first time I saw it, it was in Mauritania. You know where is Mauritania? It's in Africa. It's just below Morocco. There are so many warehouses with frozen seafood that they are waiting to be shipped to Europe as exports. So 100% of them will have financing, either locally or from abroad. For simple reason, because they need to aggregate the goods before they can export it. They are not going to export 5 tons of seafood. They are going to export big quantities of seafood. Not 5 tons, 500 kilos of seafood. So I personally visit them, and the local banks in Mauritania, they actually finance them. But why I visit them? Because the local bank want to borrow from us. At that time, I was working for another organization, not IFC. I was based in Africa. So, of course, in China, this is everywhere. And we have a webinar not long ago, only talk about one thing, frozen goods cluster. So there's a big city, near the big city, there is a cluster, warehouse cluster, which only do one thing, frozen goods. Frozen tuna from Japan, frozen the shrimps from Vietnam, from wherever, frozen meat, frozen yogurt, wherever. Basically, all of them have financing and they use inventory collateral. By simple logic, if they don't have financing, they cannot do the business, right? And there are certain ways to do it, which I will not go into detail. There was a special webinar for several hours just on this, on the frozen goods. So the business is actually there. You will also have importer and the dealers, which are dealing with household goods like television, refrigerator, air conditioner. When they import, they will import large quantities, and then they slowly sell them over the next 3 months to 1 year. They will definitely need financing if you do it, but I know you do not do it so far. So please think about how to make use of all this opportunity. Is not only about rice. Of course, we strongly encourage you to do rice, but not only rice. There are other examples like cement. Cement will normally also need financing and huge quantity of inventory because the importer will need to import and then gradually deliver to construction company. There are other examples of construction material like plastic pipe. Nowadays, you are pipe inside the building, you are pipe below the surface of the land. Basically, all of them are plastic pipe. These plastic are special plastic. I actually meet with some time ago, I met with the largest producer of plastic pipe in the world. They are actually operating in Cambodia. They are distributor or wholesaler. They do not get financing from you. Remember, they do not get financing from you. How do they do the business? They get financing from the manufacturer abroad, which I made personally. This is your business, but you are leaving on the table. You are only interested in consumer finance and microfinance. But for the country to develop, the country needs business finance, which you need to deliver and make money from it. Business finance actually is quite easy if you know how to do it. So, and is in big quantities. And so these are some of the examples that you can consider. Now, the other matter I need to talk about is, as we say, that the warehouse that you are going to deal with, the inventory collateral, is either monitor or control. Typically, this is by a third party. We will collectively call this third party collateral management company, or CMC. I know 99.99% of you will immediately say, oh, in Cambodia, we do not have a CMC for many years. So you are going to say it again tomorrow and next month. So I would like to say that demand creates supply. If you do not have demand, if you do not look for the demand, there will be no supply. Those players who actually came to Cambodia before. One is CWT, which already is no longer there because they have an incident in China. So another one, I forgot the name of the company, also from Singapore. So all of them came to Cambodia and they had left Cambodia because you do not use them. There is still one which is still remaining, but they basically had no business. So they do commodity inspection. So they are around. When we say CMC, the company do not necessarily carry the name of a collateral management company. This could be a logistics company, could be a warehousing company that do the job. It could be whatever company. Now, as I say, it could be an e-commerce operator. Now, there are other type of companies that will play a role in this area. Basically, any big seller. Big seller are like manufacturer, wholesaler, importers. They can play the role of collateral management company. Some of you have heard me say before about one business model in this area. So the business model runs like this. So you want to buy the 100% of the goods from a big seller. And you want the bank to finance, let's say 60%. The lender, either bank or non-bank, they will say, okay, so you first pay 20% of the money to the manufacturer or wholesaler. And then these goods will be delivered. These goods will be automatically mine collateral. Once you use that 20%, for example, you sell it away, resell it as a distributor, then this money must recover back to my bank. Once I receive the money, then I will authorize the release of the next 20%. Once you sell the next 20% or use the next 20%, I recover the cash, then I will authorize the release of the next 20%. So it's 20% to 20% to 20% until 100% of the goods is released. Effectively, the wholesaler or the manufacturer is a collateral management company. Of course, they will sign an agreement with the lender. While they do that, if without the financial, those people cannot sell. They can sell a little bit, but they cannot sell much. So they will love you actually. So there are different ways of doing the business. But the important thing is that your management had to understand, and the management had to create business line for trade and supply chain finance, or simply for transaction banking, or simply they had to force your SME lending people, your corporate lending people to use movable asset. Do not rely only on immovables. You are already suffering in the last 2 years from immovables. If you do not change, you will continue to suffer. So I will pause here, and then when necessary at the end, I will come back again. Now the floor back to Srinath. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinchang. Huyen, should I wait for you before I proceed?
No, thank you, Jin Chang. So very, insightful information about the Cambodian markets. So I think that right now we can go directly to the topic of warehouse finance to be presented by Mr. Srinath Kashavan. Mr. Srinath Kashavan is our consultant, and he is the CEO of the Jetrix consulting firm, and he has very rich knowledge and experience in warehouse finance, including the SMA and CMA, as Jin Chang mentioned about two topics before. So now, Srinath, the floor is yours, and after Srinath presentation, so we will have the Q&A and discussion among the participants as well. And during Srinath Kashavan presentation, if you have any questions, so please feel free to write it down and put it in the chat box, and then later on, so Jin Chang and Srinath can help you to answer the question. So thank you, and floor is yours now, Srinath.
Thank you, Huyen. And thank you to all attending for making the time to be with us in this webinar. My name is Srinath. I'm speaking to you from my office in Singapore. Very briefly, I've spent my entire career that runs into more than 40 years in trade and trade financing. I've been a banker. I worked on the corporate side as a corporate finance executive. And in this phase of my current career, I focus on knowledge transfer and skills development. It is a great honor to be in front of you to be able to speak on this topic. It's a very important topic for those of us who are interested in working capital finance. Many businesses rely on sufficient access to working capital finance. So what I intend to do is between what we're discussing today and what we'll discuss in the second version of this webinar, we'll start off with some understanding of the environment in which we're operating. What are the things that we need to be aware of, and what do we need to be taking note of? Then we'll be looking at how businesses are organized and why the need for warehouse finance becomes very, very relevant. When we get to the second webinar, I will be making detailed presentations on collateral management companies, stock monitoring agencies, the type of contractual commitments that they enter into, and how do banks put together financing on the back of a collateral manager's intervention in holding the goods on behalf of the bank. I recall Mr. Heng Koi making brief references to the fact that there are many small-scale industries, businesses that are urgently in need of financing. There was also reference to the gap in financing between potential borrowers and the banking system. I will address this as well in the course of today's presentation. So let me share the screen with you. My screen, I'm going to put up my slides. So you should be looking at my slide now. We live in very interesting times. There's been a recent change at the top of the US government, and we are listening to a lot of news about tariffs. We are listening to a lot of news about trade imbalances, amongst all the other domestic issues that apply in the case of the United States. But this could have significant impact on how businesses choose to organize themselves. If China becomes a victim of a tariff regime, then it'll clearly increase costs for the consumer on the one hand. On the other hand, it would also cause, by design, a movement of supply chains. It would cause businesses to relocate some of their production and exporting activities to other countries that are not the focus of the US government. Then there's also the unfortunate wars occurring, one of which is close to being resolved, hopefully. But wars can be a disturbing factor, even if it's in only one part of the world. And then there are the financial markets. Financial markets are showing considerable volatility. There's a lot of uncertainty because it's tied to economic conditions of countries as well as the geopolitics that accompanies that. So all in all, very, very interesting times that we live in, and we have to find ways to make the best of it. For banks, it can be very challenging because you're preoccupied with the risks that you are required to take up. Your customers are involved in a range of businesses, and as a bank, you are, of course, looking for opportunities to support your customers. But then there is always the issue about the type of financing or the type of support required. And it's my understanding that warehouse finance is one of the areas which has great potential, but is still to catch the interest of the major lenders in Cambodia. As Jin Chang mentioned, warehouse finance by itself is not a new product. It is something that's been done in many countries around the world. I, as a lending officer in a bank, and also when I shifted over to the corporate side as representing the borrower, I can recall at any one point in time, we would have, just our company alone, would have 15 to 17 locations around different parts of the world where we would have stocks maintained, and we have banks to fund the stocks until we are able to make deliveries to our ultimate customer and collect the monies from the ultimate customer. And this is just one company that I'm speaking of. There are many businesses that would be doing this. So in considering this topic of warehouse finance, probably the first most fundamental question that I would urge you to consider is, why does a business do warehousing? What benefit do they gain? Is it reducing the risk of their business? Is it making it possible for them to get better sales receipts? Is it because they're selling in markets where it's necessary to warehouse and show goods to the customer? So think about this. Think of various situations that you'd all be familiar with. Every time the harvest, the agricultural harvest occurs, the farmer puts together their harvested stock and they aim to sell the stock to the marketplace to the marketplace at whatever good price they can get. Now, when the farmer approaches the market, they end up meeting demand. Two types of demand. One is a demand for immediate consumption, and the second is a demand for future consumption or later consumption. But all in all, it is quite likely to be the case that the demand for immediate consumption might be significantly less than the total harvest size. So if the farmer were to present his entire harvest in a marketplace where the demand for immediate consumption is just a small percentage, say 20% or 15%, then the laws of economics will tell you very quickly that the farmer will not end up getting a good price because they'll have to sell it at hugely discounted prices in order to be able to sustain themselves. So what's the solution? I'll leave that point to you to think about, and we'll come back to this in a little while. Think of another scenario, a factory, and you have many of those factories in Cambodia. Factory wants to maintain a ready stock of raw materials at a location stored close to their factory.
So sorry, Srinath, I think your slides projection didn't move.
Yeah, I haven't moved it.
Oh, you didn't yet. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just setting the stage.
Okay. Thank you.
Before I come to that. Yeah. Thank you. Anyway. So why does a manufacturer want raw materials close at hand? A third question. There's an orchard owner who's growing oranges. And they're growing oranges, obviously, in the rural areas, which could be very far away from where the consumption occurs, the city population where the consumption occurs. Now, by virtue of the fact of the distance that exists between the growing area and the consumption area, it is conceivable that when the oranges have to be sold, if there's somebody who wants just 1 kilo of oranges, the farmer or the orchard owner is unable to service that because the economics of delivering 1 kilo of oranges may not be attractive. It might be loss-making. But if the orchard owner or the fruit grower were to maintain a warehouse close to or within the consumption area, which is the city market, then it allows the fruit grower to not only deal with bulk supplies from restaurants and from businesses and from juice makers, etc., but also deal with retail demands of 1 kilo, half a kilo, or 2 kilos. So the market coverage for the fruit grower becomes more extensive. And the only reason why they're able to do that is because they have access to warehousing. Coming back to the manufacturer, they want to make sure that their production line remains operating 24/7. They don't want to have downtime or delays in production, so they would like to have raw materials close at hand. Therefore, they engage in financing of stocks. And coming back to the farmer, it's a similar situation. This farmer wants to obtain the best price possible. And so instead of bringing the entire harvest to the marketplace, they bring only a portion of their harvest, and the rest they choose to warehouse and hold and bring it into the marketplace at different points in time in future. So these are just very generic examples of how the practice of warehousing can benefit the business that is behind it. So let's look at an actual situation that is occurring in Cambodia. So let me read out the case for you. This is about fresh fruit produce grown in Cambodia. There are farmers who are cultivating it in the rural areas, and they often face challenges in keeping harvested fruits fresh before transporting them to the markets. These farmers rely on crop collectors to pick up their produce. However, collectors often do not come to promptly pick up the fruit because quantities may be too small and the farmer location may be too remote. So because of the long waiting time for the fruit to move from the growing areas to the storage area, or the storage area to the consumption area, a lot of the fruit is basically lost because it goes bad. Now, I've listed 3 questions here, and I'd like you to attempt to see, please feel free to just turn on your speaker and to suggest any responses to the 3 questions which I've placed in blue. I welcome that. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think it through, and then I'll come back online. So the first question is, list the specific challenges the farmers endure. What might you think these specific challenges may be? Would anybody like to suggest what are the difficulties a farmer might be enduring? Let me start with a suggestion. One clearly is a cash flow crisis, because whatever monies they had, they've invested in the growing of the crop. Now they're looking to harvest the crop and bring it to market as quickly as possible. Fruit can go bad very quickly. When we buy fruit, what do? We take it and put it straight in the refrigerator. But what if these type of facilities are not available? What does the farmer do? Would anybody like to suggest a solution? Okay, seems that I'm going to be the only one answering my own questions, but I welcome any participation. Anybody would like to jump in? We talked about the cash flow crisis. We talked about fruit going bad. So that results in loss of market share. And if you have loss of market share, it's very difficult to recover it because your competitors in the marketplace will fill the gap that you create by not supplying to the market. This would be another issue for the farmers. The third issue is standardization of quality. If you have an organized procurement system that delivers products to the marketplace, the farmer will very quickly get to understand what is the market demand in terms of quality of produce. And therefore, there may be the creation of standards according to which the product is classified and then labeled and accordingly sold. And if indeed it is of the highest standard, according to the classification, there may be some financial premiums that the farmer could earn. But that opportunity, again, may not be available simply because they have a logistical problem. The logistical problem is that the product doesn't get to the marketplace quickly enough. So if there's one thing that you think this farmer needs, what could it be? Final question. If there's one thing that these farmers need, what could it be that would help them? What do you think it could be? How about refrigeration facilities? If you have temporary refrigeration facilities, does it reduce the distress of the farmer? The question that needs to be also asked is, what are the transportation arrangements that will move the cargo from point where it is cultivated to the point it needs to get to the city market? So if there is a participation of the logistics sector, both in terms of providing temporary refrigeration services and then packing and transfer to a destination where the product gets sold, then that may actually create an opportunity and the possibility that this farmer not only is successful in the current scale of business they're doing, but they could also be expanding beyond this point because of the profits that they earn. And bear in mind, if we do this on a big scale, Cambodian fruit produce will gain an international brand. Now, when we go to the supermarkets, you see a lot of Australian brands, you see a lot of New Zealand brands, you see a lot of Chinese brands of food products. And clearly the volumes that are consumed are significant for the producers to continually invest in expanding their production and bringing to market more value, which previously they couldn't if they didn't have the financing behind all this. So it comes back to a very fundamental business case. Why do warehousing? And that would be the first point at which a bank could start the inquiry. On the top left-hand side, I've given you a source link, so feel free to click on that after we finish today's session. Now, when we think about any business, the business could be entirely a domestic business. It's also possible that there may be some cross-border movement, imports, exports. It doesn't matter. The point is this: when you get introduced to a particular customer and you become aware of their particular activity, whether they are a trader, whether they are a manufacturer, whether they're a processor, or whether they are a service provider, the important thing for us to do from the banking side is to understand the context, the supply chain context in which this potential customer is located in. So who do they buy from, who do they sell to? Or if they're a service provider, who do they provide the services to and how do they get paid? There's a certain connectivity that links all businesses, some more efficiently than others. And you will notice that when the customer that you are potentially looking to recruit as a bank customer, if they are indeed in a supply chain that is running very smoothly, then it raises their overall business efficiency in terms of making payments and getting receipts. So they are able to manage their working capital better. And if there are any gaps in working capital, they can rely on the banks to give them some temporary funding. But most importantly, when we think about businesses in a supply chain context, it's about an uninterrupted supply and uninterrupted demand, meeting of demand, so no market disruption. Now, for example, when the wars began between Russia and Ukraine, the global markets had a meltdown on account of disruption of wheat supplies. There were countries that were so totally dependent on Russian wheat or on Russian gas or on Ukrainian wheat, Ukrainian produce. But by virtue of the war conditions, those supply chains got disrupted. But the good outcome of that was businesses discovered new linkages, new supply chains. And so there's been a shifting of supply chains from the areas which have been causing trouble to areas that are less patronized. So please do consider the context, the supply chain context, because it's important for you to understand on whom the potential customer that you're looking to recruit is relying on in terms of suppliers and buyers. And in the process of that, you look at balanced markets in the sense that there is less speculative action. One of the most vivid examples of trying to tamp down market volatility is in the case of the United States. The United States maintains a petroleum reserve as a national priority, so that in the case of a sudden shortage of access to crude oil, then this national reserve is used to fill the gap. But the US government announces the actual reserve that they're holding simply to give assurance to the marketplace, whether they're producers or consumers or traders, to give the assurance to the marketplace that, don't worry about temporary stoppages of oil. the US government is holding sufficient supplies in case of need, and we can jump in to fill the gaps, if any. And with that, this reduces the speculative activity in the global markets when it comes to pricing of petroleum. Now, have the same principle, but at a much smaller scale, whether it is fruits, whether it's vegetables, whether it's meat, whether it is industrial products. If there is information available to the marketplace that there is adequate access to stocks of raw materials or of finished goods or of intermediates, then to a great extent that reduces the anxiety in the marketplace. And therefore the speculative action is also, shall we say, less apparent. Another thing you need to consider when your customers are looking for particularly financing of goods and storage, in a way it helps them manage their credit risk exposure. Because remember, when a producer or a seller of a product needs to sell to a buyer, it could well be the case that the seller may need to give credit terms to the buyer. And for these reasons, the seller is taking a credit risk on the buyer. Now, if there is some assurance that the goods are available, and instead of taking credit risk on the buyer, the seller chooses to arrange their own warehousing, arrange their own stocking, and with their own financing, therefore they don't need any should we say, risky contractual actions to take place, simply because they're controlling the goods, although it's at a remote location away from their point of production. So in a sense, we use warehouse financing and the holding of stocks as a means of reducing credit risk of the business. And then you need to see how it translates into reduction of credit risk for the financing bank. A major problem in many of the developing markets that we are concerned with is the fact that, for example, the producer, a farmer, is producing a certain crop, and they are bringing it to the local rural market and trying to sell it at whatever best price they can. But does the supply chain stop there? The answer is no. Supply chain extends to transportation, to processing, and ultimately to consumption. And the price which is paid by the buyer of the produce to the farmer, so the price that the farmer gains and the price at which consumers pay in the city could be vastly different. And therefore, essentially, in the absence of any understanding of what the terminal market prices are, the supplier may actually be selling at too low a price. And therefore, there's a necessity to share information in terms of how much is in the supply chain pipeline, how much is in stock, and what are the prices that are being paid for procurement at a primary level, say the farmer level, and what are the prices at which the same product gets sold at the retail consumer level. And that will give some understanding about, is there a lot of, shall we say, excessive profit margins that are being stuffed into the price. So think about that. Again, all this becomes relevant once you start thinking about supply chain context. So what am I talking about when I say supply chain context? Here is an example for you. Food supply chain. So you have a sequence of counterparties who are linked together. It could be that the owners of each stage of the supply chain are different. So the one who grows is not the one who processes and packages. The one who processes and packages is independent of the transporter, and likewise down the line. So you see this in practice happening in every part of the world, including in your part of the world. And the reason why you have the supply chain and the reason why you have disparate ownership across the supply chain is because each owner of a particular activity is earning a margin. And when they earn a margin, they're incentivized to do more of that activity. Now, the bigger corporations in the world, when you think about the giant multinational corporations, they are not just doing one part. They're not just doing growing, or they're not just doing processing and packaging. They take ownership over all the stages of the supply chain from end to end. And therefore, they become very powerful in terms of their ability to procure, their ability to convert it through manufacturing, packaging, and distribution. So think of the major multinationals. Think of who produces your toothpaste. Think of who produces your domestic cleaning products. Think of who produces utilities that you use in your home and offices. So in this way, you can figure out to what extent is the supplier who's selling to you integrated into the supply chain that they're relying on. Are they controlling the whole supply chain, or are they controlling only parts of the supply chain? You'll see both types of paradigms operating in the marketplace. Now imagine you're a processor packager. If you're a processor packager, you are relying on supply of raw material coming from the grower or the supplier or the producer. And later, after you have completed the job of processing, packaging, you will want the product to be distributed. Therefore, you're relying on logistical services and then distribution services. And if indeed all these are available to you, then it becomes, shall we say, feasible for you to have a business case. So at every stage you see, pretty much you see the intervention of storage. And that is because there's a, shall we say, a discontinuity. The amount that is deliverable by the grower may be in excess of what the processor packager can immediately deal with. So therefore, intervention of storage. Then there may be transportation capacity limitations. Then there may be, shall we say, seasonal demand, seasonal supply. So for these reasons, you could you could intervene in the supply chain with storage in different stages, and that benefits the business to manage their risks. Now, when we talk about supply chain, we also tend to talk about the concept of value chain. And let's look at since we've talked about fruit, let's look at a fruit example. So let's assume you are buying a kilo of oranges at your local supermarket, and you pay a price of 10 units of currency. Now, work yourself backwards on this supply chain and try to figure out how much exactly is the grower earning from the same sale of 1 kilo of oranges. And don't be surprised if it is a significantly smaller amount. It could be, for example, excuse me, it could be a sum like $2 or $2, 2 or 2.5 units of currency. And therefore, what the consumer pays versus what the grower actually gets reimbursed for, there's a vast difference. But the justification for that could be, well, there are costs of moving the goods, there are costs of cleaning the goods, there's costs of classifying the goods, and there are costs related to advertising and overheads for display in the supermarket. So there are a range of costs that need to explain the gap between what the farmer earns at 2 to 2.5 units per kg versus the 10 units of currency that the consumer paid. And as the bank, we try to understand what this cost structure is to make sure that we have looking at a viable supply chain. Now, switching more to your activity, I'm proposing 2 approaches to financing customers as being the most relevant for our discussion. One is a borrower-centric lending proposition. The other is a transaction-centric lending proposition. Now, borrower-centric is cases where you're giving funding to a borrower based on the collateral that they're placing with you, based on their financial standing. But the collateral they've given to you is a very significant part of the decision-making process. And the tangible guess I can make is probably one of the collaterals that might be favored by the banks might be real estate. It's a common circumstance where real estate is funding or is supporting a loan transaction between the borrower and the bank. Now, once the loan is disbursed, the question that needs to be answered is, to what extent do you have as a lender a transparency over the actual usage of funds? Do you have any controls over the usage of funds? Do you have any visibility on where the funds are being deployed in the activities of the borrower? Or are you simply relying on the fact that since the customer has provided you with a good collateral, such as of some sort of real estate asset, that you feel pretty safe, that you don't need to be mindful of, shall we say, the real-time monitoring that's necessary when we look at other type of lending models? The problem with that is that you don't have enough visibility in terms of what risks the funds are exposed to after you've disposed it off. And it doesn't end with the fact that the borrower has the capability to use it as they wish. You're also concerned about how does the repayment occur, because the last thing you really want to do is having to proceed against the client and have the client get into a spat with you about the collateral being encashed. And collateral encashment, again, is not such a straightforward process. In most countries, it involves, again, legal inputs and legal actions. And so it's not instantaneous that the loan falls due yesterday, the customer defaulted, and today you're able to sell the real estate and get whatever money you can. One could be because of market circumstances, but most often the gap that exists when it comes to encashment of collaterals is the legal process that you have to encounter, and there's a cost attached to that. But it's a common practice, and so we see this happening in different parts of the world. The other thing that you need to take note of is that if indeed you've got, say, real estate-backed loans, which are actually used for something unconnected with real estate, then how do you get leverage over the borrower? How do you get to understand whether the context in which the loan has been granted, both for the borrower and as well as for the lender, and what's the riskiness to which those funds are actually exposed to? So these are some of the very fundamental issues that you're dealing with, but that's become a way of life. Increasingly now, what we see in the banking world, particularly in developed markets, is the increasing presence of transaction banking. When we talk about transaction banking, we're talking about transaction-centric banking. So the bank has evaluated the customer for their ability to borrow and repay. There is a business that they're looking to fund, say for procurement of raw materials, and then waiting for those raw materials to get converted into finished goods, and the finished goods being sold in the marketplace. So what is the transaction cycle? What's the corresponding cash cycle? What's the profitability of the business? What is the speed with which goods and cash gets converted? So you get a more, shall we say, precise idea of where the funds are being deployed, how they're being deployed, and by when you can expect repayment. So a lot of the working capital facilities that are now granted by banks in the transaction banking space are offering 60 to 90-day financing, because that's the period within which the cash cycle rotates. And once the first tranche is paid, then the second tranche is issued, and so on and so forth. So transaction-centric financing has also been seen to be less risky because of the real-time monitoring processes that can be inserted, and also because it is a smaller amount that is borrowed at the same at one point in time, and it is at fitting the requirements of the business much better than simply giving a loan against collateral and then waiting till the due date. So a recommended shift is shifting away from simply collateral-backed lending to more intrusive transaction-centric lending. And if you're filling a gap in working capital financing for the borrower, I think it'll be a welcome idea. In fact, I've spent a lot of my time in my career as a lender providing transaction-centric financing. Well, nothing is without problems. So it's my duty to also highlight what could be the problems that occur when you're doing working capital financing, when you're doing stock financing, when you're relying on stocks as a means of collateralizing your exposure. So there's always, in all warehousing, there is what's referred to as the market risk. The market risk is that the value of the product that is being stored declines, the market value declines while it is in storage. And therefore, the amount it can generate in terms of cash flows might be less than the cash flows that were necessary to produce the product. So that's why there is considerable understanding of, say, the nature of the product, what is the safe period of time for which the product may be stored. So, for example, coming from my own experience, we used to stock sugar in certain markets and sell bag by 50 kilo bags of sugar at any one point in time. And understanding the biological characteristics of sugar, we had to make sure that depending on the type of geographical place we were selling, is not too humid, is not too hot, then we need to make sure that the sugar gets sold before it turns yellow. That's just one example that applies. But interestingly, in the case of rice, you can store rice for periods up to 4 to 5 years under the most ideal conditions. And in the marketplace, there is a premium that's often paid by buyers for old rice, because old rice comes with a certain flavor that is not available with recently polished rice. So that's another reason that would influence what goes into storage and how quickly does it come out of storage in terms of a sale and delivery. Another issue that you should be mindful of is if indeed you're relying on storage of produce based on which you're providing funding to the owner of the produce, how is that ownership of the goods actually evidenced? How do you know that the person who's coming to you with goods to be financed while they're under storage is the actual legal owner? So is there a mechanism in place to do that? If you're talking about cross-border movement of goods, then there's always currency risk because the procurement is done in one currency and the sales is done in another currency. So the ability to manage the currency gaps, is that available through the banking system or otherwise? In the marketplace, you come across people with different, shall we say, bodies of information and knowledge, and you don't want them acting on the basis of imperfect knowledge or incomplete knowledge. So in marketplaces, is there a way of protection against that? This is not really the case in every marketplace, but it is something that you'd be looking to do. And in marketplaces where you can't go to an exchange and try to hedge your price risk or your financial currency risk, then you look for bilateral contracts or OTC contracts, over-the-counter contracts. So there's a private arrangement between the bank and the borrower, if such contracts are permissible in accordance with your local regulations, of course. Another issue that can be disruptive, but which is commonly followed in many, many developing countries, is the government intervention by putting a floor price at which product can be sold and a ceiling price at which product can be consumed. Or, sorry, the imposition of floor price is the price at which the cargo must be sold to the open market, and the ceiling price is the maximum price at which the product may be acquired. So when there's an intervention by the market to protect a certain constituency, whether it's the rural community or whether it's the consuming community, it gives rise to certain, shall we say, imbalance in the marketplace. And that could lead to later difficulties as well. So it's something that you need to navigate about it. When the government decides to do it, you have to cope with it and make sure that your customer is not at a disadvantage. And if they are at a disadvantage, to what extent is the exposure held by the bank on a clean basis? So do you have some cash collateral? Do you have something else in the nature of covering you as a lender for the goods that are under storage? Finally, I'd just like to talk about dispute resolution. Disputes can occur between parties in the commercial scenario, relating to supply of goods, relating to movement of goods, relating to storage of goods. So could there be, shall we say, an effective dispute resolution mechanism? It doesn't need to be a court. It could be a trade association. It could be a non-judicial body, but whose authority is recognized by all the participants in the business as being fair arbiters of disputes. So if that is in place, that would be a further safety valve that financiers would be looking at. I already spoke about legal obstructions to enforcing liquidation of borrowers' assets, so I won't dwell on that anymore. Please take a few minutes to view what's on this slide before I resume my discussion. Okay, what you see on the left-hand side is a cash conversion cycle. And what you see on the right-hand side is part of the balance sheet of a business. Let me just flip back to what I showed earlier, the food supply chain. In this chain of businesses that are tied together, or chain of activities that are tied together, at various points in time, each operator in the supply chain will have payables, receivables, and stocks. Now, coming back to what I was looking at a short while ago, coming back to the balance sheet. Increasingly, we see in the marketplace solutions for receivables financing. More recently, we've seen payables financing, also referred to as supply chain finance or approved payables finance, to cater to the payables due from the buyer. And then in between, you've got inventory, which, as you can see, is also likely to be a major component of the current assets of a business. But if you're in the business of financing receivables and you're financing payables, and you're not in the business of financing inventory, then the business suffers a disruption in its funding flows. Because you've got payables at one end of the transaction, you've got receivables at the other end of the transaction. And in between, you have inventory. And if you don't finance inventory along with receivables and payables, then clearly the borrower or the business that is trying to operate its business will suffer a cash gap. They may not be able to get enough cash to be able to fund the inventory themselves. So bear in mind, you've got procurement finance, you've got distribution finance. Linking the two in between is what's called inventory finance, putting it in very simple terms. And if you are providing a continuous there's a greater possibility that the business will not only survive, but prosper. Whereas if it's the other decision where you choose to finance only receivables and payables and not the inventory, then you're causing or leading to what could be disruption in the finances of a business. And not all business owners are good at managing their financials. So for these reasons, one of the recommendations made is that if you have been able to complete your assessment of a potential borrower, and you choose to then go the transaction-centric route, then it becomes an interesting proposition for you to not only be financing the payables, but after that, convert it into inventory finance, and then the inventory finance gets converted into receivables finance. So it's not that you're financing all this all at one time. There's a flow, starting with payables, then inventory, then receivables. And that becomes, shall we say, a stronger case for you to earn revenues, to have greater control and visibility of the cash flow situation of the borrower, and being responsive to the business needs. But now when you turn your attention to the left, the circular diagram that you see on the left, I'm trying to make a different point. So let us start with the grant of a loan, which you see on the top left-hand corner of the circular diagram. So a loan is taken, a working capital loan is taken from a lender. That loan is deployed to buy raw materials, which are temporarily held in stock by the borrower. Over a period of time, the raw materials in stock are delivered into the production facility and it becomes part of work in process until it becomes finished goods. The finished goods are stocked prior to sales for a temporary period, simply to gather enough saleable lots, economic order quantities. Sorry, is there something that's I need to know? I heard a voice.
Yeah, it's somebody who forgot to mute.
All
So,
right. Okay.
everyone, please mute, and Serena, please continue.
So you see the cash that was given as a loan passed through as raw materials as finished goods, and finished goods as ready goods for sales. And once the ready goods for sales are available, there are one of two ways. There's sales on a credit basis, which gives rise to receivables, or there's sales on a cash against delivery basis. You have cash collections. But anyway, you have an accumulation of cash, and that accumulation of cash is directed towards repayment of the loan. This is what we're looking to achieve in transaction-centric banking. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting this is because there is little or no reliance on the net worth of the borrower. Assuming the net worth of the borrower is stable, you are in a position to finance a transaction flow independent of the shifts in their net worth standing. You're also not relying on cash flows from any other part of the business. It is self-sustaining. As long as this chain of events that is represented by this working capital cycle can occur independently of all other activities in the business, you are not, as a bank, exposing yourself to the necessity of trying to extract the net worth of the borrower. And this is what happens in transaction-centric financing. The ability to isolate the cash flows, isolate the underlying goods, and the ability to isolate the receivables and cash. That is really what's happening. And this is what we're attempting to do with the insertion of warehousing as a commercial activity. A quick look at warehouse infrastructure. As I said earlier, there are two webinars that you are scheduled for. The first one is today, and I'm focusing primarily on the first 3 points on the agenda. And I will be going into details of collateral management, stock monitoring, etc. in the second webinar, as and when that's scheduled, hopefully soon. Now, reliance on good infrastructure is not only for the depositor or the storer of the goods, the owner of the goods, but it's also good for the banks. The banks want to be reassured that there are good quality civil structures that may be used for the purpose of warehousing. And when we talk about warehousing, you see sometimes very simple arrangements. It could be even open air warehousing, depending on the nature of the goods. So if it's a location which is, shall we say, there's no propensity for rain to fall, there could be a fenced-in area with security in place where goods are stored in open air. Or they could have just simple covers like you see in the middle here. Or you could have more sophisticated facilities. Top left-hand corner. Those are grain silos. They look like grain silos to me. Whereas on the bottom right-hand corner, you see the ship that's loading or discharging, and beside that you see storage facilities, that's storage tanks for liquid cargoes. And finally, you also see storage for bagged cargoes or refrigerated fresh produce. It's very important for the bank to actually understand what's happening when goods are being warehoused. Where are they being warehoused? Under what conditions and circumstances are they being warehoused? How is the goods that are in the warehouse being insured? How are they being protected in terms of security and theft? What is the standards of, shall we say, quality inspection, quantity inspection? So there are a variety of factors. There's a protocol that arises from the professional practice of warehousing. And collateral management companies are also very well qualified to provide guidance on this. So if indeed, as a bank, you choose to open up a new business line called inventory finance, and that includes a range of possibilities, as Jin Chang Lai was talking about, then one of the things that you'll pay attention to is the existence and the availability of good warehousing infrastructure, because that adds to the security that your goods are held in good state and are safely stored. Then there are a list of initial questions in terms of which particular products. For example, should you be storing paddy in anticipation of it being delivered into a rice mill? Should you be storing dairy products? Should you be storing raw materials for garment manufacturers? You'll be making choices. You'll be understanding what is the nature of the flow, the nature of the products that need to be stored, the period of time that it takes for goods to move from raw material stage to finished goods stage. What's the cash conversion cycle? What is the quality of warehousing? And how important or critical is it for the businesses who are approaching you for warehouse finance to have access to the goods as well as the warehouse financing to be in place? So I've provided a list of questions purely from an agricultural perspective, but many of these questions can be amended to suit the particular purpose for which you're considering warehouse financing. But what is extremely important is that there must be, shall we say, some standard principles on which you abide by. And you may choose to put those standard principles in place to abide by for a financing business that you want to enter into. But bear in mind what you do for industrial related products under storage versus natural products under storage could vary. So please be mindful of that. So I've given you these points here simply as a tick box, but there may be additional points that you may need to look into depending on your local regulations and your local conditions. But it's just a guideline of the type of inquiries and answers, question and answers that must be asked and answered. I've gone into also desirable criteria for what is suitable for warehousing, what is suitable for warehouse financing. Not that everything that goes into a warehouse is suitable for financing. You really want to be able to look at the possibility that if, while goods are stored, if the customer goes bankrupt for reasons unconnected with what's in storage, how, as a bank, are you in a position to get some resale value? So is there, in some of the businesses that I've done in the past as a lender, we would sometimes finance raw materials for a particular business, and we would also have a standby buyer. A standby buyer who's contractually committed to come and buy the goods if the original business that's being financed fails and they're unable to repay the bank. Then the standby buyer will come in, take the goods that are in the storage facility based on which financing has been extended to that particular borrower. And in order to incentivize that standby buyer, a discount is available on the goods that are going to be bought by the standby buyer. It could be range anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20%. What is the recovery rate? The point is the bank at least recovers 75 to 80 to 90% of the loan and doesn't need to suffer the entire 100% loss. So think of that as a solution. In the commodity space, there are, of course, derivative exchanges that are in place that could do it for certain commodity stocks. But you need to, shall we say, see the liquidity risk attached to the product in the sense that how many buyers and sellers are there in the marketplace, how quickly do goods get sold and purchased. You'd like to understand how valuation is done for the product in terms of seasonal and unseasonal periods of time. And you'd also like to understand during the period of storage and beyond, what are the necessary logistical activities or protections that need to be in place. So here again, it's to give you a tick box of has your customer engaged in these activities to reassure you that the storage facility is safe. Now, Jin Chang made reference to warehouse finance and warehouse receipts finance very briefly. This webinar and the one to follow is not about warehouse receipts finance. It's about warehouse finance. But purely to be clear on what these two concepts are, I'm just giving you a brief overview on it. Please bear in mind that the intention of this webinar is not to expand on warehouse receipts finance. So that's why I chose to put it in black. Our preoccupation is with warehouse finance. So what's the difference? So let's start with the basic model of warehouse finance. And this is what you see happening all around you. So you have a borrower, you have a warehouse, the borrower places the goods in the warehouse, okay? And for the purposes of this example, let's assume that the warehouse is, shall we say, lender approved. So there are banks in many parts of the world who are engaged in warehouse financing, and they have a ready-made list of warehousing facilities that they have pre-approved as being safe warehouses from the point of view of the bank as well as the borrower. But of course, the storage is being done at the request of the borrower, or at the risk and the request of the borrower, not the bank. But the bank says, if you want us to support a financing of your inventories, then the goods must be in one of our approved warehouses. So you have that. The warehouse acknowledges receipt of the goods to the borrower, and on the borrower's instruction also informs the bank that yes, we've received goods which are being held to your order as per the instructions we received from the borrower. So that brings in the intervention of the bank. The borrower provides lender a legally security interest over goods. I think Huyen mentioned, she made reference to the secure transactions law that exists in Cambodia. So that's one of the legal statutes that you'd be looking into. You'd also be looking at legal statutes connected with how a pledge is to be created or some similar security interest is to be created if the legal basis on which the legal instrument or the mechanism is different. But it is something that secures the lender in terms of specific goods, a legally enforceable security interest over specific goods. So that's what the borrower enables the lender to perform by virtue of the fact that they've delivered goods into an approved warehouse. And furthermore, the warehouse has atoned, you see the word atonement, has atoned to the bank that yes, we've got physical custody of the goods and we're holding it to your order in accordance with the instructions received from the borrower. So all going well, if there's an existing arrangement between the borrower and the lender, then the lender chooses to grant the borrower a loan commensurate with the discounted market value of the goods. So goods are valued at 100. What's actually disbursed as loan could be 75, could be 60, could be 80, depending on the nature of the goods, depending on the period of storage, depending on the physical location where the goods are stored, held by the buyer, and where the buyer, held by the seller, and where does the buyer require the goods to be sent. So these are all adjusted to decide the discounted market value of the goods. So that is to ensure that the market risk that I referred to earlier is to an extent at least covered. While the goods are in storage and being financed by the bank, the borrower is in search of buyers. They locate a buyer, and having located a buyer, the borrower attempts to sell the goods to the buyer. And having sold the goods to the buyer, then the question of payment and delivery arises. So until the bank gets the money for the goods that need to be released to the buyer, the bank will not authorize the release of the goods from the warehouse. So in a sense, this entire operation is under controlled circumstances. Once the bank receives the money for specific goods or a specific portion of the goods, then the lender will authorize the warehouse to make delivery to the buyer, enabling the buyer to take delivery of goods and take it forward in the supply chain, whichever supply chain they're part of. Now, this is the most common arrangement that you will notice around you, whether in Cambodia or elsewhere in the world. and it is the most widely practiced, because warehouse receipts finance, which is the other type of funding that we'll briefly refer to, is looking at a wholly different model, a wholly different circumstance. So there's a private arrangement between borrower, warehouse, lender, and buyer. And it's not necessary that every customer of the bank passes through the same counterparties, except, of course, for the warehouse. That could be a common counterparty in several transactions. In warehouse receipts finance, the context is different. I just now spoke about a private arrangement between lender, borrower, and warehouse. Now, there are circumstances in certain parts of the world, like, for example, in the United States, for example, in South Africa, like, for example, in Kazakhstan, and as, for example, in Australia. There are several locations where you have a very organized warehousing system where different owners of warehouses located in different parts of the country all sign up for a common system of warehousing, common storage and warehousing agreement terms, common practices in terms of the fees they charge, common practices in terms of their contractual duties, and common contracts with the depositors, which is typically the borrower of the goods. So you could have a completely organized, uniform warehousing system that operates in the same fashion, regardless of which warehouse is involved, as long as they're part of the organized warehousing system, as long as they're licensed, as long as they're included in the organized system, then you have an arrangement whereby they subscribe to standard rules, standard obligations, standard practices. And this, as I said, happens in a few countries around the world. And what I just told you was not an exhaustive list, but I can assure you that the list of countries is very short compared to the number of countries that we have on the world today. Now, what am I trying to communicate? So there's a borrower who has certain goods that they like to place in a warehouse. Having placed it in the warehouse, they get a written acknowledgement in the form of a warehouse receipt. And that warehouse receipt is issued in a standardized format. Now, the lender who is funding the borrower in the ordinary course of business clearly is familiar with the organized warehousing system. The organized warehousing system is financially seen to be secure because there are insurances in place, there are indemnity funds in place, there is a restriction on what can be stored in the warehouse, what quantities, in what manner, how are they to be packed, how are they to be assessed in terms of quality. So high degree of standardized storage is occurring, and each storage facility is part of a whole nationwide system that exists. Now, the simple action of the borrower placing goods in the warehouse gives rise to an acknowledgement from the warehouse in the form of what's referred to as a warehouse receipt. And this warehouse receipt is what is transacted between the borrower and the lender. The warehouse receipt is given to the lender in place of any other collateral, because the warehouse receipt itself represents the goods that are in the warehouse. And the legal terminology that we use here is that the warehouse receipt is classified as a document of title. A document of title is one represents a specific goods, a specific consignment of goods at a specific location. And when anybody wants to take the goods out of the warehouse, of course, the warehousing costs must be paid for. But once that is done, the question is, will the warehouse release the goods simply because their costs have been paid? Well, the answer is no. The warehouse will require that the warehouse receipt that they issued in the first place and gave to the borrower is redeemed with the warehouse for cancellation. So at any point in time when the goods leave the warehouse receipt against those goods has to be canceled. And once it's canceled, then the liabilities of the warehouse are extinguished. As far as the lenders are concerned, they are not shall we say, relying on direct control over the goods. They've allowed the goods to be placed in this organized system, which would be a government-approved system in most cases. And the lender is sufficiently satisfied that when they have the warehouse receipt, they have a genuine, authentic certification of the existence and storage of the goods. And on that basis, they enter into funding arrangements with the borrower. As far as the buyer is concerned, it's exactly the way it works previously in the standard warehousing finance system. So here you have a slightly different, shall we say, model. And this is not what we're going to be talking about, because in the standard warehouse financing, which you're looking at right now, there may or may not be a warehouse receipt. And even if there is a warehouse receipt issued by the lender, the warehouse receipt is not legally considered a document of title. And by virtue of the fact that there's somebody who's holding the warehouse receipt, they cannot demand delivery of the goods against cancellation of the warehouse receipt until and unless the bank authorizes it in this case. Okay. I put some notes here further distinguishing between warehouse finance and warehouse receipts finance for you. I leave it for you to read and absorb. Also some notes here on the same topic. Why is the warehouse receipt finance, shall we say, seen as a very credible mechanism? And why do banks rely on the existence of a warehouse receipt reflecting the existence of goods? It's because there exists an enabling legal framework under which the warehousing system operates and under which any dispute resolution, if it occurs, is resolved. Fundamentally, the big difference between the one that I showed you, the warehouse receipt finance, and the warehouse finance model. In this case of a basic warehouse finance model, the the warehouse may not issue an indemnity for the full value of the goods. Yes, they're responsible for the goods while they're under the physical protection, but they may not provide a full indemnity. They're providing a convenient service to the borrower and the bank of being custodians of the goods while the transaction occurs between the borrower and the bank. So they're not offering their financial guarantee if for any reason goods decline in value or get spoiled due to no fault of the warehouseman. And if for any reason there is a loss of goods, then to the extent that the warehouse's insurer will compensate, that's the maximum that the warehouse will financially underwrite any loss of goods. This is the reason why banks need to be watchful and mindful of supervising what's occurring in the warehouse. Now, don't get too intimidated by that. It's not so complicated. There's a simple set of checks that need to be made, and that more than suffices. Whereas in the warehouse receipt system, presuming it's a government-approved or a market-approved system, the indemnity offered by the warehouse for redelivery of goods is significantly more than what was in the basic model. But this system works only for certain categories of products. So for example, in the United States, you've got the federal warehousing system that is, as far as my knowledge goes, is restricted to the storage of grain and the storage of peanuts and the storage of cotton. There are some private warehousing arrangements that attempt to be like a warehousing receipt system, but the cotton and the grain are probably the most significant examples because very significant volumes pass through the United States federal warehousing system. So the enabling framework makes it feasible for the bank to rely on this framework to protect themselves in terms of the fact that they're relying on a document of title. The warehouse receipt is a document of title. There are very standardized duties and obligations on the part of the depositor and warehouse operator, and that the financial cover that is required by the bank and the borrower is substantially more available in the organized system than it is in the basic model. But the basic model is the way to start and build up. And that brings me to the end of my presentation today. I'm open to questions. Just to recap, what we did today was to understand the context in which warehousing gets done and what is the concept of transaction-centric lending. We also looked at what was warehouse receipts finance. Before we did that, we looked at what the basic model is of warehouse finance and what differentiates warehouse receipts finance from warehouse finance, bearing in mind that this webinar is not about warehouse receipts finance, it's only about warehouse finance. So now I'm open to questions. Please feel free to put it in the chat box or to speak. Unmute yourself and speak.
So again, today is only the first part. So next month we will organize the next part, which will have more details about CMA and SMA. But today the first part. Any questions?
Hi, Kristen.
Hi.
Srina, I just sent you 2 questions. Can you please look at your
Chat box.
private chat box? Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
May I read out the question
Sure.
for the benefit of everybody here?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Okay. The first question, James, right?
Yes, correct.
Right. James, the first question you asked was, who will be responsible for the warehousing cost, bank or borrower? The answer is very clear. It's borrower. It's borrower at all times.
Okay, thanks.
Second question, is there a title of goods transfer from borrower to bank once the goods stored in the warehouse? Title to goods transfer can be done in one of 2 ways. One is under a warehouse receipt system, you lodge the warehouse receipt in the custody of the bank. The bank takes physical custody of that warehouse receipt. In the case of a goods under the standard warehousing basic model, there's a pledge agreement that's entered into between the borrower and the bank, with the warehouseman providing the custodian services that are required to perfect the pledge. But in the case of a warehousing, the basic model, the legal ownership of the goods remains with the borrower, but the bank has access to the goods and the ability to sell the goods directly if the borrower fails to meet their financial obligations to the bank. Okay. So
Yeah, okay.
legal ownership remains with the borrower, but the right to take it out of the warehouse and to sell it has been extended to the bank in order to recover the dues of the borrower. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Hold on. So that's a good question. So this can be talked about it for several hours. So 10 days ago, not me, so it's one of the association which we helped to set up. So they have a legal round table. Around 100 people participated in another country about the legal matters behind warehouse finance.
Yeah.
So I just secretly draw in to listen. And then in the meantime, I was privately chatting with some legal people in the audience.
Right.
So it was organized by the Collateral Management Association, which we helped to set up, and then the legal organizations. So you see that just the legal issue one can discuss for several hours. So there are many details. So when you really get down to the business, you will know what are the details. So in the case of Cambodia, remember there is no more pledge, mortgage, and other things like transfer of claims. So there is no more under the secure transactions law. So if you want to use the very, very old civil code, you can do that, but you are right, there will be much, much less protected. Any sensible lender will not use the civil code. So except for special situation. In the case of Cambodia, when you take security interest on inventory, so your only language is secure and security interest, nothing else. So never use mortgage or pledge or things like that. In the not yet fully reformed country like Vietnam or China, and they will say mortgage or pledge or transfer or the retention of title. So there are several ways legally to do it. But in Cambodia, you only have one way, which is security interest. If you want, you can have retention of title, which in principle also covered by the secure transactions law. But mind you that if you are the owner of the goods, you have more responsibilities. So suppose your goods has like chemical goods, then your responsibility is very large. If it's a food product or grains, if those has some problem, then you also have to, because these are food, if you poison people, you also have to take responsibility. So typically, lenders will try not to be the owner of the collateral, but is only a lender. But in some cases, you may want to have retention or title. There may be some good reasons. But under your law, actually, simply a security interest holder is good enough. So having said that, you will be in a better position if you take purchase money security interest. And purchase money security interest is clearly defined in the secure transactions law, and you will have automatic perfection if you register before the borrower get the possession of the goods, and your priority will be higher than any other creditors. Why your priority higher? Because those goods did not exist before. You are the one who make it exist, and therefore you need to have more rights. So always remember, whenever possible, try to use purchase money security interest. It's called PMSI. I will type it here, PMSI. And don't be surprised if you are not a lawyer. So when you talk to the lawyer may not be familiar with it. So that means they need to be trained. But don't be surprised if they don't know. And you can learn yourself also. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Thank you for that, Jinshan. Another question from Fali. Is that the way to pronounce it? Fali? So the question I have is the warehouse financing considered as green loan? My response to that is not as a matter of course, but depending on the supply chain context. In the supply chain context, if the supply chain, in the supply chain context, it is classified as or certified as being part of a, well, what I'd call a green chain of events, then warehousing is a temporary phase that the goods pass through. And perhaps under those circumstances, you may obtain classification, but I would defer to the auditors who do the green audits, who do sustainable finance. And depending on what product you're talking about and where the goods are going to be stored and how the goods are going to be used. So very much the supply chain context will determine the answer to this question that you've asked. So all I can say is not as a matter of course.
Whether it's green or not, it depends on there's a word in English, I forgot. It's about terminology, but it's not terminology. Huyan, what's the word again? I keep forgetting the English word. And so there's a standard, there's a market standard for green or not green. So, and there's an English word for it. I suddenly could not remember. Let me see.
I think IFC has a
taxonomy.
Taxonomy. Yeah, I think IFC has published it, right?
No, hold on. I will explain. Taxonomy. And so we are actually helping your authorities to develop the taxonomy. So I thank you, Shin-So. So we are actually doing this with your government. So this will be released soon. So, or maybe after 1 or 2 years. So now in this space, please think about green warehousing instead of green finance. So warehouse consumes light energy, right? Sometimes the temperature will need to be below a certain level, and there are other types of equipment being used in the warehouse. And if the warehouse is built in a certain way, then you will save energy. And then if the storage is done in a certain way, you will also save energy. Now, unfortunately, for your information, from what I know from the real experts in warehousing, they say that they had never found any modern warehousing in the Cambodia. But this does not mean that you cannot do warehouse finance. These are two different things, right? So as long as you have warehouse, you can do warehouse finance. So they are all like the very old style warehouse. Very few the real modern warehouse. So so this is related to that. And then to have green warehousing is actually a very good initiative, but this is probably too early for you guys. So most of the banks you look around, except for real estate financing, in recent years, before they do not even do that. So there is very little the commercial finance. So if you want to know what it means, you just ask yourself, does your bank has a specific business line for trade and supply chain finance or transaction banking? Do you have a specific business line for structure and special finance or no? Most of you don't have, right? I know 2 or 3 banks has. So Acleda Bank has, but most other bank you don't even have. So very little the commercial finance. So it's too early to talk about that. Please try to do some business first before you go too far. So the difficulty we have is we want to help increase business finance outside real estate, but this has not been very easy. And some of you heard me always say that I think the legacy reason, historical reason, is because the whole banking and finance industry is from microfinance. And before microfinance, it was NGO. So modern banking concept had not really taken root in Cambodia. So this will take some time, but in the meantime, whatever you can do, whatever you can learn, please do so, and try to convince your CEO and chairman. Otherwise, they will always say that, oh, nothing is real except land and building. So now you have great difficulty with land and building, with real estate financing. Now you see what will happen. Your non-performing loan ratio is so high. So is it safe to finance land and building? No. Actually, but revolving around cash conversion or asset conversion for the equipment, then is the way to go normally. So I will pause here. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from PSECOM. Being a bank who is fund provider to the seller/buyer, is it possible for the bank to act as facilitator to find the buyer and seller, which means the bank will involve end-to-end in the whole process of supply chain? Now, I do not know what might be your regulatory conditions for this, but ordinarily, the only time you'll go looking for a buyer to get goods off your back is in a distress situation. So when we talk about end-to-end financing across the supply chain, these are independent relationships between each supply chain provider, supply chain service provider, or supply chain operator. If you have 5 operators in the linked together in a supply chain, you will have distinct and separate relationships with each of the 5. And only if, I guess, the nature of the transaction is your risk appetite, meets your risk appetite, then you may do an end-to-end financing. But the bank, digressing beyond banking to performing a commercial service, is ordinarily outside the scope of a bank's licensed activity. So when you think about supply chain financing end-to-end, it's certainly feasible, but as long as you find that the commercial responsibility for contracting is a matter that is dealt with by the commercial parties, as far as a bank is concerned, you may choose to approve or disapprove of it, but for you to actually go out into the marketplace and find a buyer or find a seller is not standard banking practice.
Sorry. I think the question is more asked in terms of enforcement. That's what I guess.
That is a bad loan situation then.
Yeah, that's what I guess. So okay, there are several situations. So first you need to possess the collateral. So and then you need to dispose. Dispose means sell in commercial way. And after that, you need to distribute the proceeds. So your law in Cambodia is actually excellent in this regard. So as a creditor, you have much higher right and credibility than the creditor in any other developing countries. But having said that, you know your judicial system, which we do not need to discuss that. So please rely on yourself. And next time during the second webinar in the beginning, just like today, I will talk about this issue, how to handle it in a commercial way and by yourself. There will still be cases that you still need to go to the court, which may take 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. And if you still want to file, you take the cost, and that's the part of your normal business cost. But in terms of disposition means selling your repossessed collateral. So yes, the bank as a creditor, after you have possessed, you can certainly sell the collateral. And I know you will say, oh, it's not easy and things like that. And actually, it's quite easy nowadays, since like a decade ago. You can sell it on e-commerce, actually. So occasionally do it, I think there's no problem. But as you are a lawyer, so you first need to educate the lawyer. They may not understand financial transactions. So, and then if you need to do it in an organized way, then the Ministry of Justice had to give some kind of a rule and need to like approve certain e-commerce to do it. It's actually very easy to do on the e-commerce. You can advocate for it, speak about it, and talk about it everywhere. Then you will happen. So you have to sell it in a commercially reasonable way. If you do not do it that way, the borrower will take you to the court. You have to compensate for the borrower. So these are the basic concepts under modern secure lending. And the good thing you have is everything what I say is already written in your law, except the e-commerce part. E-commerce part is only a small administrative thing. So you are actually in a good position. I know in Cambodia, everyone will say, oh, I don't do this because of enforcement. Why people say that is because Vatana say, and then Han Koi will say, Han Koi say, Srinath will say, Srinath say, then Kamara will say. So it's passed on from one person to another. Then it becomes a myth, NYTH, and it never dies. So from yourself today, you need to kill this myth. Otherwise, the market will not progress. There are many ways that you can enforce, many ways you can sell, but you will never know until you do the real business. So far, you are doing very little business. So please get your hands dirty first and doing the business. Then you will figure out how to do it.
Moving on, question from Tip Darat. The question is, to proceed with warehouse financing, we talked about the hold and release goods in the warehouse. Hence, is the warehouse required to be managed by the collateral management company? And then the second question is the warehouse owned by the borrower with service offered by CMC, or the CMC provide the warehouse? Okay, let me start with the second question first. And the second question is referring to a circumstance where the warehouse is owned by the borrower, but a CMC is inserted into the arrangement. Yes, that is perfectly feasible if the collateral manager is willing to provide that service. And we refer to this commonly as field warehousing. So that is where the warehouse actually belongs to the owner, and the control and hold is managed on behalf of the bank and the borrower through the parachuting of a collateral manager, independent collateral manager, into the storage facility. So that is the second question. As to CMC providing the warehouse, that happens in the rarest of conditions because CMC providers are essentially service providers, warehouse supervision, warehouse control, warehouse reporting. Their prominence in this financing arrangement has nothing to do with whether they own the warehouse or not. And even if they own the warehouse, in the very unlikely circumstance where they own the warehouse, the ownership of the warehouse wouldn't be the collateral management company itself. It would be another company of theirs, a related company that would actually own the property which is occupied by the warehouse or the warehouse civil structure. And then the collateral manager will be a service providing company allied to that company. But they'll all be dealing at arm's length basis. But the circumstance that CMC provides the warehouse is almost unlikely, given the fact that the CMC's business is not to provide warehousing, but is to provide control over goods that are in the warehouse. That is the second question. The first question, to proceed with warehouse financing, we talked about the hold and release of the goods. Hence, is the warehouse required to be managed by collateral management companies? Well, the answer to this question is really about what works between the borrower and the bank. Traditionally, when we talked about goods financing, the simple model was the basic model as I provided to you, without any intervention of a separate collateral manager, right? But increasingly, particularly in the case of commodities, we are seeing the intervention of collateral managers being inserted, despite the fact there's a pledge agreement between the borrower and the bank. So it's all case by case whether a collateral manager is to be inserted or not as part of this arrangement. Jin Chang, any thoughts?
I find you already answered. Let's move on.
No. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions here. Hold on. Also, you mentioned about discount rate on the goods to be given the loan. What is the standard maximum discount rate for warehouse financing? Tibdarat, I don't have an answer to this question because I said it's very specific to the nature of the goods, the marketplace, who the bank is, who the borrower is. I have seen cases where financing has been done to the extent of 90 to 95%. And I've also seen a large number of transactions where there's 80% funding that's provided. If the funding is much less than that, say 50%, it's less attractive to the borrower because they have to put up the rest. But I cannot specify a standard discount rate. It's very customized to the particular transaction nature of goods and location.
Yeah, let's consider some examples. First, normally in the industry, we do not say discount rate, right? We normally say advance rate or lending rate. So suppose, I mean, this will give you some idea of what kinds of business you will do. So suppose you have an importer of car. He's not going to import 10 cars and then sell 10 cars, obviously, right? So you will import 5,000 cars, 50,000 cars, 100,000 cars at one time. And then these cars will arrive in a port, maybe now the new port of Phnom Penh. And then this will be stored in the bonded warehouse, which is controlled by the customs. Customs authority is like police, is like military. You cannot break in on your own. So this will be very safe. So you can line like 80%, 90%, I think is okay. If the car is not going to deplete very quickly. So this is quite safe. So, but why they need to borrow again is because they want to buy at once. At once means one time in large quantity so that the unit price will be low. and then they will gradually sell the car. The car will be sold in the next probably 1 year. And this is very common. I have seen it personally many times. And these cars in the bonded warehouse, huge amount of financing. And for the banks, you can make a lot of money actually because the value is so high. And then if you get 300 basis point margin, then you will make a lot of money. So this can be high. On the other hand, on the other extreme is suppose you have rice warehouse, not a modern warehouse, and it is owned by a rice processor, and you are not doing a control form of financing. It means only under SMA, stock monitoring agreement. So somebody will monitor it, means they go there once every 2 weeks, but no one really control the warehouse. In those type of situations, if you trust the borrower and if you have some monitoring and control over the cash flow after the processor sell the rice, you may be able to land around 50%, 50%. So it depends on the situation, and normally it will be evident to you what are the advance rate that you can apply to. And the other consideration is if you do it in a major way, it means the quantity is very high. Typically, you will need to hedge the price of the commodities. But in Cambodia, you do not have possibility to hedge the commodity price. So in that case, you may have to lower significantly the advance rate. So this will be also be sensible the consideration. But in most countries, they can actually hedge the price. So it means they sell the commodity price risk to another party for a fee. And this can be done easily. You don't need to worry about it. You don't understand what it means, how to do it, and things like that. They are commodity futures companies. They specialize in this area, or maybe the commodity department of a securities company that can do this. They will explain everything to you. They will knock on your door. They will try to do everything for you, as long as you have basic understanding. So no worry about these kind of things. Of course, we see in normal market, these people are always around. So if you have commodity futures company, they will certainly be here today in our webinar as soon as they hear some whisper from somebody. Why? Because they want to look for business opportunities. They are always around somewhere and to see whether or not you need support or not. Okay.
I have a question from Chia Marat. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. Pardon me if I haven't. For warehouse financing, point number 1, what is the agreement arrangement between these tri-parties, borrower, warehouse, and the bank, to ensure that the products can be only released to buyer when there is instruction from the bank? Okay, now, I hope you will be attending, Chair Marat, I hope you'll be attending the next webinar, because the next webinar focuses on questions like this. But let me at least give you some hint of this. The 3 parties in a collateral management agreement are the borrower, the lender, and the collateral management company. Now, I'm telling you this on the assumption that the collateral management company and the warehouse owner are 2 separate entities, 2 separate unconnected entities. They're not related companies. So ordinarily, the warehouse owner, only in the capacity of a landlord, is not part of a collateral management agreement. So collateral management agreement is strictly between lender, borrower, and collateral management company, the company that performs the collateral management services, to ensure that products can only be released to buyer when there is instruction from the bank, because that's what they're tied down to in the collateral management agreement. So hoping you'll be there the next time this webinar is held, because I will go into quite some detail on the terms and conditions in the collateral management agreement. And that will include the protections for the goods and who's authorized under what circumstances to release the goods. So I hope you'll be there when I see you for the next webinar. Moving on, point 2. Point 2, just a second, please. Okay, point 2, what is your recommendation in order to prevent product release from warehouse without bank instruction? Thanks. Okay. Again, that's a question that will be better answered during the webinar the next time around, because one of the issues I'll talk about are the insurances that the collateral manager is required to have in place. One is a professional indemnity cover and the other one is a fidelity cover. So that to an extent will provide compensation in the case of unauthorized release of goods. But that is something that the bank should not rely on. So just like I referred to pre-approved warehouses being on a panel pre-approved by the bank, likewise, there's a pre-approved list of collateral managers. And you will look carefully at their track record, their professional standing, their performance as a collateral manager, how many times have their customers had to claim under the insurance for loss of goods that was released without authorization. So you will be doing this due diligence before you even authorize or choose which collateral manager will be allowed to be involved in cases where you're financing the goods. It's also the point I'll also be making when I see you next time is the obligations of the bank, the lending bank. Just because a collateral manager has been appointed in place doesn't mean the bank goes to sleep. The bank has to also have a mechanism of supervising the collateral manager to make sure that everything is in working order from time to time. Otherwise, you're asking for grief. But again, this is a matter I'll be addressing when I talk about collateral management agreements the next webinar. So I hope you'll be there, and please remind me of this question if I don't refer to it automatically. Let me see, is there another message? All right, that's from Shamarat. Any further questions?
If no more, then please come again to the next webinar. So any more? So we don't have a formal closing. So ABC say that the association say that I can say a few words just to close it. So, and I don't have much to say, but I'm very grateful for all your participation and for the very good questions that you have asked. So we really want to see the market moving and for the benefit of the country. And then thank you for your participation. And thank you, ABC, for the great cooperation. And thank you, Srinath, for always giving an excellent lecture. So I think we will close it here. We are almost 2.5 hours today. So we will find a date next month to have the webinar too. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Yuan. Thank you, Jing.
Thank
Chang.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
ขอบคุณ
Happy
Thank you.
Lunar
Happy
New
New
Year for
Year.
those
Yes,
for
Jing
those
Chang, for you
celebrating. Happy
particularly.
Lunar New Year.
Yeah.
Bye, Ching Chang. Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.